Hello for Palm Sunday. This homily is to be given out at the very beginning of Mass when we bless the palms, and then enter into church, and then read the Passion of Jesus Christ. And this year we read Luke's account of the Passion of Jesus Christ. First of all, palms. In the church we've been using palms as a reminder that Christ entered into Jerusalem for his passion, his crucifixion, and resurrection. And we call it Passion Sunday or Palm Sunday. Sort of interesting, in the different evangelists, Luke says this: the people were spreading their cloaks on the road as Jesus entered into Jerusalem. Matthew says, while some began to cut branches from the trees and laid them along his path. And only John says they took palm branches and went out to meet Jesus. So whether they used cloaks, branches, or palms, it doesn't make any difference. Palms made the history how we celebrate Jesus goes to Jerusalem to suffer, to die, and to rise. And so he goes into Jerusalem to do this. We go into church to remember, and we think of, in the future, the new Jerusalem as we go into heaven. But at any rate, this year it's Luke's gospel, or Luke's account of the Passion of Christ. Listen to it when we get into church, or listen to it after you read, or while you're reading. The strange thing is, all four evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they do not mention much about the physical sufferings of Jesus Christ. People later on do this. For example, like the Stations of the Cross. When I was in the seminary, they had a book called The Doctor of Calvary, when it explicitly talks about the medical and the painful and the bloody and whatever, why Jesus Christ died and how he died. And the Hispanics, or the Spanish people, are very well known for their bloody accounts of the sufferings and death of Jesus Christ. So they really do not, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, say much about the physical suffering of Jesus Christ. All four of them say they crucified him. Very simple. They crucified him. But all four give a different account about this death of Christ. And the pain is not so physical as psychological and mental. And they all do not do it the same. I'd like to just point out a few things in Luke's gospel that we use this year. Luke's account. First of all, Luke is a master at demonstrating Jesus' concern for other people. Unique to Luke. Listen for it. For example, in Luke's account, he is the only one who replaces the high priest's servant's ear when it is cut off in the garden. He's not so much worried about himself, if they're going to take him and crucify him or crown him with thorns, but Jesus is interested in this servant's ear. And that's only in Luke. Oh, they refer to it sort of, like in John, when it talks about he who lives by the sword dies by the sword, in this ear incident. I'm sorry, but in today's news world, I cannot help but think about this whole thing about gun control. That passage, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. In my head it goes, He who lives by the gun dies by the gun. But only Luke is so considerate about another person, Jesus puts the ear back on. Only Luke mentions that Jesus, when he's outside there, and they're questioning, aren't you to these other apostles, aren't you a friend of his, and aren't you connected with Jesus, and warming themselves? And only Luke mentions where, when Peter denies him 3 times, Jesus turns to Peter and looks at him. Jesus' concern for Peter in this time when they are arresting him, making sport of him, and begin his sufferings. Only Luke tells of the weeping women as Christ meets on the way to Calvary. Only to these weeping women does Jesus Christ have a concern for others when he's saying, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves. And weep for when you're going to have problems when I'm not here. You in your life. On his way in his suffering, Jesus is concerned about those other women. Only Luke, while he's hanging upon the cross, has this incident of the good thief. When the bad thief is saying, get us out of here, the good thief just says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus, suffering and dying, is connected with and concerned for the good thief. This day you will be with me in paradise. Thinking not of himself, but the one on the other side. And finally, only Jesus is praying for his persecutors in Luke. Luke says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Suffering and about to die, he's concerned about his persecutors. Unbelievable. Unbelievable what he did. And it's interesting to look at the Matthew, the Mark, the Luke, and the John and see how they presented very differently. Oh yes, and there's one other thing, that in Luke's Gospel, 4 different times Luke has people pointing out that Jesus is innocent. And only in Luke does he have Pilate saying it 3 times, that this man is innocent. I just find that interesting. You can only get so much, and this year the church is saying, let's listen to Luke, his account of what Jesus Christ has done for you and what Jesus Christ does for me. We can only comprehend a little bit at a time. Palms, cloaks, meeting the women, all of these things as presented by Luke. We begin Holy Week, a serious week, a week when we try to understand a little bit more how much Jesus has done for us, how much he loves us. Have a good Holy Week